She was stripped of her title, her face burned with the searing iron of a traitor, and cast into the deadly whispering weald to rot. They thought it was the end of her story. But they didn't know the most ruthless predator in the kingdom was waiting in the shadows. The annals of the Northern Territories record the winter of the Howling Frost in 1247 as the most unforgiving season in a century. But for Genevieve of Oakhaven, the chill in the air was nothing compared to the ice in her Alpha's eyes. Genevieve was the daughter of Beta Thomas, a man who had bled for the Oakhaven pack until a rogue ambush took his life. By all the old laws, his daughter should have been protected, revered even as the scion of a loyal warrior. But power is a fickle, venomous thing. When Thomas died, the political landscape of Oakhaven shifted. Alpha Cedric, a man driven by paranoia, and the whispers of his manipulative daughter Beatrice, saw an opportunity to consolidate power. The true conflict, as documented in the fragmented letters recovered from the Oakhaven archives decades later, was born of petty, vicious jealousy. Arthur of House High Hill, a wealthy lord from the neighboring trading routes, had come to negotiate a treaty. Beatrice had set her sights on him, but Arthur's eyes lingered entirely on Genevieve. Genevieve, with her cascade of auburn hair and quiet, unyielding grace, was everything Beatrice was not. And in the medieval werewolf courts, a bruised ego could quickly escalate into a death sentence. The setup was flawlessly executed. In the dead of night, stolen missives bearing the wax seal of the feral mountain rogues were planted beneath the floorboards of Genevieve's chambers. A stash of silver weaponry, the ultimate contraband, was found buried near her father's grave. It was a crude framing, but Alpha Cedric did not need ironclad proof. He only needed an excuse. The trial was a sham, a public spectacle, held in the mud-slicked courtyard of the Oakhaven Keep. Genevieve was dragged before the council, in torn linen, shivering in the freezing sleet. She did not beg. She knew the pride of her father flowed through her veins, and she would not give Beatrice the satisfaction of her tears. Genevieve of Oakhaven. Alpha Cedric's voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls. You are found guilty of conspiracy with the feral sects. You have plotted to bring ruin to our borders and silver to our throats. For this, the punishment is exile. But so that no neighboring pack may ever grant you shelter, you shall bear the mark of the betrayer. The crowd fell dead silent as the village blacksmith, a man named Hearth, who had once gifted Genevieve wooden toys when she was a pup, emerged with the glowing iron. The brand was a crescent moon, intersected by a jagged broken line, the universal symbol of a traitor. Genevieve's breath hitched, but she held her ground. Two hulking guards forced her to her knees, seizing her arms. Hearth hesitated, his hands trembling, but a sharp snarl from Cedric spurred him forward. The hiss of burning flesh was a sound Genevieve would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. The agonizing, blinding pain erupted across the left side of her face, right along her cheekbone. She screamed a raw, guttural sound that tore through her throat as the smell of her own burning skin filled her nostrils. The brand seared through her flesh, branding her soul just as deeply. When they finally pulled the iron away, she collapsed into the mud, gasping her vision, swimming with black spots. Beatrice stood on the balcony, above a cold, triumphant smile playing on her lips. There was no time to heal. Bleeding, feverish, and half-blind from the agony, Genevieve was hauled to her feet and marched to the borders of the Whispering Weald. The Weald was a massive, untamed stretch of ancient forest, practically a graveyard for exiles. It was crawling with monstrous beasts' starvation, and the very rogue wolves she had been accused of conspiring with. "Walk!" Captain Rorik sneered, shoving her past the boundary stones. "If you try to return, We will shoot you with silver arrows. May the goddess have mercy on you, because the woods will not." Genevieve stumbled into the dark tree line, clutching her blistering face. She was 19 years old, utterly alone, and marked for death. But as the heavy canopy of the weald swallowed her, blocking out the winter sun, a fierce primal instinct ignited in her chest. They wanted her to die a traitor's death. She decided right then and there that she would make them regret the day they didn't kill her themselves. For the first 3 weeks, survival was a brutal, agonizing teacher. Genevieve shifted into her wolf form, a sleek, pale timber wolf with a dark patch over her left eye where the brand burned her skin even in her animal state. She learned to hunt field mice, to crack frozen streams for water, and to sleep in the hollowed-out trunks of rotting oaks, burying her nose in her tail to stave off the lethal frostbite. She became a ghost, shedding the last remnants of the noble girl from Oakhaven, devolving into a creature of pure survival. 400 miles to the north, in the brutalist stone fortress of the Obsidian Keep Alpha King, Kaelin of House Redfern was preparing for war. If Cedric of Oakhaven was a tyrant, Kaelin Redfern was a god of death. Kaelin had not inherited his crown peacefully. 7 years prior, his royal uncles had assassinated his father, aiming to usurp the throne. At 22, Kaelin had hunted down every last conspirator, slaughtering them in their halls and painting the snow red. He ruled the kingdom of Ethelgard with an iron fist and a cold, impenetrable heart. Standing at 6'4", scarred from 100 battles, Kaelin was a legend whispered about to terrify disobedient pups. He had no queen, no mate, and zero patience for the sycophantic nobility that tried to parade their perfumed daughters in front of him. But a king cannot govern a crumbling border. The feral mountain rogues, the same faction Genevieve was accused of aiding, had grown terrifyingly bold. They had ambushed 3 royal supply caravans, leaving no survivors. Furious, Kaelin summoned his vanguard, his elite unit of monstrous warriors led by Commander Gideon, and rode south to the Whispering Weald to eradicate the rogue camp himself. It was midwinter when Kaelin's hunt led him deep into the Weald crossing paths with the desperate, scarred girl from Oakhaven. Genevieve had been tracking a wounded elk for 2 days. She was starving her ribs, showing through her pale coat, the brand on her face pulsing with a dull ache. She finally cornered the beast in a snowy clearing, her muscles coiled to strike. But the wind shifted, and the scent of rotting meat and stale blood hit her nose a second too late. Before she could leap, 5 massive, matted rogue wolves burst from the underbrush. They didn't want the elk. They wanted her. Territorial and starving, they circled her, their yellow eyes flashing with malicious intent. Genevieve bared her teeth, her snarl echoing through the clearing. She was outnumbered and emaciated, but she refused to die cowering. The largest rogue lunged. Genevieve dodged her jaws, snapping shut on his ear, tearing it free. The rogue howled, and the remaining 4 descended upon her in a flurry of teeth and claws. She fought with the ferocity of the damned blood staining the snow, but a massive paw struck her side, sending her crashing into the trunk of a pine tree. As the lead rogue moved in to rip her throat out, a sound shattered the quiet of the forest. It was a roar, deep, guttural, and so laced with dominant alpha power that the very earth seemed to vibrate. From the shadows of the high ridge, a nightmare-made flesh descended. Kaelin in his wolf form was a beast of unparalleled size, his fur the color of a starless night. He hit the clearing like a siege weapon, his jaws clamping down on the lead rogue's neck. With one violent shake, the sickening crunch of bone echoed, and the rogue's lifeless body was tossed aside like a rag doll. Behind him, Commander Gideon and the vanguard flooded the clearing. It was not a battle. It was an execution. In less than a minute, the rogue ambush was decimated, the snow painted crimson. Genevieve lay panting against the tree, bleeding from a deep gash on her shoulder. She watched the massacre with wide, terrified eyes. She knew exactly what these wolves were. The sheer size, the disciplined brutality, the heavy scent of ozone and steel. This was the royal vanguard. Calen stood amidst the carnage, his massive chest heaving. He turned his giant golden eyes toward the trembling pale wolf huddled against the wood. Slowly the Alpha King shifted back into his human form, uncaring of the biting cold. He stood, tall muscles corded with tension, his skin marred by old war scars. He took a step toward her. Genevieve whimpered instinctively, pressing herself harder against the bark. She prepared for the killing blow. She knew what they did to lone wolves in the woods, but as Calen drew closer, the wind picked up, carrying her scent directly to him. Calen stopped dead in his tracks. His golden eyes flared, the irises dilating until they were almost entirely black. The scent of pine needles, crushed winter berries, and something undeniably, agonizingly sweet slammed into his senses. It bypassed his logical mind, striking the ancient dormant soul of his wolf, the mate-bond a legend he had long dismissed as a fairy tale for the weak, snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike. Mine. The word echoed in Calen's mind, deafening in its intensity. He dropped to one knee in the snow before the battered pale wolf. Gideon, stepping forward with his sword drawn, barked, "My king, step away. It's a stray. Let me put it out of its misery." A feral growl ripped from Calen's throat, so dark and threatening that Gideon immediately took 2 steps back, lowering his blade in submission. Genevieve, exhausted and losing blood, couldn't hold her form any longer. Her bones cracked and shifted as she reverted to her human state. She lay curled in the snow, naked, shivering violently. Her auburn hair fell in matted tangles, and as she turned her head, the brutal, jagged brand on her left cheek was exposed to the harsh winter light. Gideon gasped. By the gods, a traitor's brand. She's an exile? Calen didn't hear him. He reached out his large, calloused hand, remarkably gentle as he brushed the hair away from her face. His thumb hovered over the raised, scarred flesh of the brand. He recognized the Oakhaven mark. He knew exactly what it meant that this girl had been deemed a traitor to her own kind. Politically associating with her was a disaster. It was an insult to the treaties he held with the Southern Pax. But as Genevieve looked up at him, her hazel eyes filled with defiance. Despite her terror, Calen felt something he hadn't felt in a decade. His cold heart beat violently against his ribs. He didn't see a traitor. He saw a survivor. He saw a queen. Without a word, Calen unclasped the heavy, fur-lined velvet cloak from his own shoulders and wrapped it tightly around her shivering frame. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "My king," Gideon asked, his voice laced with confusion and apprehension. "What are you doing?" Calen looked down at the girl slipping into unconsciousness in his arms, then locked eyes with his commander. "Send a raven to Oakhaven." Calen commanded, his voice a lethal low baritone that left no room for argument. "Tell Alpha Cedric that the High King has found his runaway, and tell him that if he ever steps foot near my mate again, I will burn his entire territory to ash." Genevieve awoke to the sensation of crushed velvet and the crackle of a massive hearth fire. For a terrifying second, she thought she was dead. The agonizing cold of the whispering Weald was gone, replaced by an encompassing, luxurious warmth. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, only to wince as the movement pulled at the stitched wound on her shoulder. "Easy, little wolf," A gravelly voice murmured from the shadows. She turned to see King Calen seated in a high-backed leather chair near the fire. He was no longer covered in the gore of the rogue ambush. Dressed in a simple black tunic that clung to his heavily muscled chest, he looked less like a wild beast and more like the ruthless monarch of Ethelgard. Yet his golden eyes were terrifyingly soft as they tracked her every breath. Genevieve instinctively raised her hands to cover her left cheek, hiding the jagged raised skin of the traitor's brand. "Where am I?" she rasped, her voice rough from disuse. "You are at the Obsidian Keep," Calen answered, slowly standing. He approached the bed with measured steps, as if approaching a skittish deer. "You are safe. No harm will come to you within these walls, Genevieve of Oakhaven." "I am Genevieve of Nowhere," she corrected bitterly, shrinking back against the headboard. "I am an exile, a branded traitor. If your court discovers what you brought into your castle, they will demand my head." Calen stopped at the edge of the mattress. He reached out gently, wrapping his large fingers around her wrists and pulling her hands away from her face. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the disgust that always accompanied the sight of her brand. "Look at me," he commanded, his alpha tone laced with absolute authority, yet entirely devoid of malice. Genevieve opened her eyes. Calen was staring directly at the scarred, burned flesh on her cheek. There was no pity in his expression, nor revulsion. There was only a quiet, simmering fury directed at whoever had dared to harm her. "In my kingdom, scars are proof of survival, not treason." Calen said, his voice a low rumble. "You are my mate, the other half of my soul. By the ancient laws of Ethelgard, that makes you the rightful queen of the North. If any lord, lady, or servant in my court questions your presence, I will mount their heads on the castle spikes." Over the next month, Genevieve healed. Under the care of the royal physician, Meister Linus, her emaciated frame regained its strength, and her pale wolf coat grew thick and lustrous once more. Calen treated her with a fierce, possessive reverence. He showered her in gowns of emerald silk and spun gold, but he never forced her to wear a veil. He made her walk beside him in the great halls, her head held high, forcing the northern lords to bow to the girl with the branded face. But court politics were a venomous game, and the peace was merely an illusion. The trouble began with Lord Reginald, a strict traditionalist, and Calen's master of laws. Reginald viewed Genevieve not as a miracle, but as a severe political liability. The king had claimed a marked traitor from a southern pack, risking a vital trade alliance for a cursed girl. The real twist, however, arrived on the first morning of the spring thaw. Horns blasted from the high watchtowers, signaling the arrival of a diplomatic envoy. Genevieve, standing on the balcony overlooking the courtyards, felt the blood drain from her face. Banners bearing the crest of the Oakhaven pack snapped in the wind. Alpha Cedric had answered the king's raven, but he hadn't come to apologize. He had brought Beatrice. Later that evening, Calen summoned the court to the great hall. The room was packed with northern nobles, vanguard warriors, and the southern envoys. Genevieve stood beside Calen on the raised dais, wearing a gown of midnight blue, her auburn hair pulled back to fully display her branded cheek. She trembled inwardly, but Calen's hand was a warm, iron grip around hers. Cedric stepped forward, his eyes flashing with feigned respect and hidden malice. Beside him, Beatrice looked radiant in crimson velvet, her eyes darting toward Calen with undisguised hunger, before flicking to Genevieve with a sneer of utter contempt. "High King Calen," Cedric boomed, bowing low, "we received your distressing raven. We have come to correct a grave misunderstanding. You claim to have found your mate, but alas, you have been deceived by a cunning manipulator. Caelan's jaw clenched, his golden eyes narrowing. "Tread carefully, Cedric. You are speaking of your queen." "I speak of a convicted criminal," Cedric countered, playing to the murmuring crowd of northern nobles, particularly Lord Reginald, who nodded along. Genevieve of Oakhaven was tried and convicted of high treason. She conspired with the feral rogues to slaughter her own people. By the High Council Code of 1082, a convicted traitor cannot hold a royal title, let alone the crown of Ethelgard. If you take her as queen, you violate the ancient treaties that hold our territories together. Beatrice stepped forward, feigning sorrow. "Your Majesty, it breaks my heart to see my former friend deceive you so." The brand on her face is proof of her blackened soul. "We have brought the original letters she penned to the feral alphas. She will betray you just as she betrayed us." The great hall erupted into chaotic whispers. Lord Reginald stepped forward, his expression grave. "My king, the law is clear. If she is a proven traitor, the mate bond must be severed for the good of the realm, and she must be executed." Genevieve felt the world spinning. Beatrice was going to win again. They had forged the letters perfectly the first time. They would have done the same now. She looked at Caelan, terrified. He would finally see her as the broken, marked thing Oakhaven claimed she was. Instead, Caelan released her hand. He stepped to the edge of the dais, the sheer oppressive weight of his alpha aura slamming into the room. The whispers died instantly. The silence was deafening. "You speak of laws, Cedric," Caelan said, his voice dangerously soft. "But you forget whose court you stand in. In the north, we do not rely on forged ink to uncover the truth." Caelan raised his hand, gesturing to the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall. "Commander Gideon, bring in the witnesses." Genevieve's breath hitched. "Witnesses!" The doors groaned open. Commander Gideon marched into the hall, escorting 2 men. Genevieve gasped. The first was Arthur of House, High Hill, the wealthy lord, whose brief interest in Genevieve had sparked Beatrice's jealous rage. The second man, trembling so violently he could barely walk, was Hearth, the village blacksmith from Oakhaven, the man who had held the branding iron. Cedric's smug expression faltered, morphing into genuine panic. Beatrice visibly paled, taking a step back. "Lord Arthur," Caelan prompted, leaning back into his throne, "please enlighten my court regarding the treason of my queen." Arthur bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I have spent the last 3 months investigating the tragedy that befell Lady Genevieve. My own guards intercepted a courier near the Oakhaven borders shortly after her exile. The courier was carrying a satchel of silver coin and a letter." Arthur pulled a parchment from his coat and held it high. A letter penned not by Genevieve, but by Lady Beatrice of Oakhaven, paying a rogue pack to ambush the northern supply routes and frame Genevieve for the crime. The hall erupted in outraged shouts. Beatrice shrieked, "He is lying. He is a spurned suitor. It is a fabrication." "Is the blacksmith lying as well?" Caelan roared, silencing the room. He pointed a massive scarred finger at Hearth. "Speak, man, before I feed you to my wolves." Hearth fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Mercy, your grace. I beg of you, Alpha Cedric threatened to slaughter my wife and pups if I did not brand the girl. He planted the silver. He knew she was innocent. They just wanted her out of the way because Beatrice was jealous." The truth hit the room like a physical shockwave. Lord Reginald, who had been calling for Genevieve's head minutes prior, now looked at Cedric and Beatrice with absolute revulsion. Cedric realized the game was lost. In a desperate animalistic panic, his eyes shifted to gold, his claws extending. "It's a northern trick," he bellowed, lunging toward the dais to attack Genevieve, hoping to use her as a hostage. He never made it past the first step. Before Kaelin could even draw his blade, Genevieve moved. The months of surviving in the Whispering Weald had stripped away the polite, submissive nobleman's daughter and forged a lethal warrior in her place. She vaulted off the dais, grabbing a heavy silver goblet from the high table. As Cedric lunged, she dodged his swinging claws with unnatural speed, bringing the heavy base of the goblet crashing down across his temple. Cedric stumbled, dazed, and before he could recover, Genevieve swept his legs out from under him. She pressed her boot firmly onto Cedric's throat, pinning the Alpha of Oakhaven to the stone floor. She leaned down, her auburn hair falling over her shoulder, the brand on her cheek fully visible to the man who had ordered it. "You cast me to the Weald to die," Genevieve hissed, her voice echoing with a newfound terrifying alpha dominance that she had absorbed through her bond with Kaelin. "But you forgot one thing, Cedric. The woods don't kill monsters. They forge them." The great hall was stunned into silence. Even Kaelin watched his mate with a look of profound, primal pride. "Guards," Kaelin barked. The vanguard rushed forward, seizing Cedric and hauling the screaming Beatrice to her knees. "King Kaelin, please!" Beatrice sobbed, all her haughty arrogance vanishing as she stared into the cold eyes of the Alpha King. "We are highborn. You cannot execute us." "You are correct," Kaelin said coldly, walking down the steps to stand beside his queen. "Executing you would be entirely too merciful. Tattor." Kaelin delivered his judgment with a calm, terrifying precision. Alpha Cedric was stripped of his alpha status, his fangs removed and banished to the deepest sector of the Whispering Weald, the exact fate he had condemned Genevieve to. Lady Beatrice was permanently exiled from all civilized pacts. Her royal titles were burned, and she was sentenced to live out her days as a nameless servant in the iron mines of the Far East. The Oakhaven Pack was folded into the Northern Territories, directly under the rule of the Obsidian Keep. As the guards dragged the screaming father and daughter out of the Great Hall, Lord Reginald stepped forward, slowly dropping to one knee before Genevieve. "My queen," Reginald said softly, bowing his head. "I ask for your forgiveness. I was blind." One by one, the entire court followed suit. The vanguard warriors, the northern nobles, and the southern envoys all knelt on the cold stone floor, bowing to the girl with the branded face. Kaelin wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. He reached up his thumb, tracing the jagged scar on her cheek, not a mark of treason, but the ultimate symbol of her unbreakable spirit. Genevieve looked out over her kneeling subjects, then up at the ruthless king who had seen her soul when the rest of the world only saw a monster. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was the beast of the Weald, the surviving spark of Oakhaven, and the eternal queen of Ethelgard. And she had never felt more beautiful. Did Genevieve's revenge satisfy your craving for justice? The branded outcast became the most powerful queen in Ethelgard, proving that our deepest scars are often our greatest strengths. If you loved this dramatic tale of betrayal, destiny, and the ruthless Alpha King who risked his crown for his true mate, don't let the story end here. Like this video, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling werewolf lore and epic sagas.